So we just talked about title insurance and why that's so important. Obviously, the main thing about, or one of the main things about title insurance is, that is acceptable evidence of marketable title, right? And we have to have marketable title if we're going to be able to convey the property from the current owner to someone else. So now we want to take a look at different types of titles, why we have to do a title search, some issues that we tend to, that are common, a lot of times that pop up from the title search. But it says the title search will determine answers to three different questions. And here are the questions. Does the seller have clear and marketable title to sell the property? We just talked about that. We know we have to have good, clear, marketable title. What restrictions or allowances apply to the property? Are there any deed restrictions? Are there any covenant restrictions, easements, stuff like that? And then are there any liens or assessments that have been filed against the property? Because if you have any liens against the property, remember a lien is an encumbrance, and an encumbrance is anything that would render a property unmarketable, right? That was from an earlier chapter. And if it's unmarketable, then you cannot convey the property. So any encumbrances would have to be removed. Liens, for example, that's an encumbrance. Those would have to be paid off, right? So they can remove the lien. But this is what this title search does. At the end of the day, we have to make sure the seller has both good and marketable title to the property. However, we do have issues that crop up from time to time when we do these title searches. And one issue is something we call a cloud on the title. A cloud on the title says it's an outstanding claim or defect that affects ownership of the property. In layman terms, a cloud on the title means the attorney or the title company, whoever's doing the title search, they have found something in the public records that might indicate an issue with the title to this property. Now, a lot of times we don't know for sure that it is an issue, but it could be an issue. That would be that would be a cloud on the title, or put a cloud on the title. Some examples you see here, and I will tell you this first one especially is very common. An old mortgage with no proof of payment. A lot of times, they will pay off their mortgage. They now own their house free and clear. Well, if the lender never filed that satisfaction of mortgage, then the lien is still on the property. So it might be years since the homeowner paid the loan off, hasn't been making payments in years, but now they want to sell it, but that old mortgage is still in the record. The lender never filed a satisfaction, which they should have, but believe it or not, sometimes they don't. So they might have to take some action, and we'll talk about what that action would be. But at the end of the day, it's got to be cleared up. It's got to be removed, and we'll talk about how we remove that here in a little bit. Another example would be errors in a deed or an unresolved debt. Any of that stuff will create a cloud. But let me give you another one that's not listed here that they may like to even use on the state exam potentially. Who knows? But say you got a woman with two children. The woman passes away. She's got adult children at this point. And she leaves everything, let's just say her house. She leaves her house to both her children. Leaves it to both of them. Problem is, many years prior, when the children were still fairly small or young, one of the children ran away from home. and has never been heard from since. Never talked to them, never seen them, don't know where they are, don't know anything about them. He just took off, don't know anything. But now that mom's died, the remaining child has inherited this home, but he didn't inherit it himself. Y'all, the will said she was leaving it to both her children. The problem is one of those children, we don't know where he is. We don't even know if he's alive. The problem is it was left to both of them. So the one that's still left, y'all, there's nothing he can do with the property until we find that other child. Because that puts a cloud on the title. There is an owner of the property now, and we don't know where that owner is. Y'all, that's a huge cloud. That's a big problem. So we would have to find that other child, be able to prove if he's passed away or died. You're going to have to be able to prove that. Again, there are actions you can take to resolve these issues, these clouds. But y'all, just to give you another example, but y'all, if there's a cloud on the title, y'all, you're not going to be able to transfer the title from one person to another. And even if you do, good chances are you're not going to be able to get title insurance. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But here's the resolution. If they do find or determine there is a cloud on the title, there's an issue, then y'all, we're going to have to resolve it through a quiet title action, is what they call quiet title. Y'all, in essence, quiet title means you're going to have to take some legal action if necessary to resolve whatever the issue is. Y'all, if it was the bank that never recorded the satisfaction and left the mortgage still pending against the property even though it's paid for, you're going to have to file a suit to quiet title against that bank, force them to file that satisfaction so that they can remove that lien from the property. Y'all, if it was a child that ran away from home, never been heard of, y'all, we're going to have to either find that child or be able to show that the child is now deceased or whatever. But y'all, to do that, you file a suit to quiet title. That's what quiet title means. Says we can involve, or it can involve, locating individuals to provide proof of resolved debts or correcting documentation. You know, again, you just got to be able to prove that whatever issue exists is no longer an issue. But then when it comes to the title company and the title insurance, and this is what I was just saying a minute ago, y'all, they will likely just refuse to even provide title insurance if there's still a cloud on the title. But even if they agree to provide title insurance, they'll usually put an exception in the policies then, but we will not cover whatever issue might exist because of the cloud. So, you know, none of that's a good thing for sure. But, y'all, again, this suit to quiet title, y'all, again, that's just the legal action one might have to take to settle a dispute or controversy or to prove ownership. Y'all, whatever you have to do to resolve or remove the cloud from the title. Y'all, under that process, it says it's used to prove ownership and eliminate false claims. And it enables the rightful owner to hold and transfer clear title to the property. So again, y'all, suit to quiet title is just a legal process to have a cloud that's on the title removed. Because you're going to have a hard time conveying that property with a cloud on the title. Okay. Now, we need to talk about some different types of title. This first one, equitable title, we've actually talked about a few times already. But if you remember, equitable title is what the buyer gets at the time the seller accepts the buyer's offer. So once you have an accepted contract of sale between the buyer and seller, at that moment, that conveys equitable title to the buyer. Remember, you must have equitable title before you can get legal title. Remember, now legal title won't be conveyed until you close. But if you don't have equitable title first, you're not going to be able to go to closing and get legal title. So we got to get that get that first. And then the legal title, again, will be conveyed at closing, either by deed or will. If you're buying the property, obviously by deed. But if you're inheriting the property, it will be by will. Either one of those would be proof of legal ownership. And then there's the chain of title. Chain of title is just a list of names. It is. It's just a list of names of everybody that's ever owned any interest in this property. It's usually it's in chronological order. But if you've ever owned real estate, you're now on that chain of title, and you never come off of it. You'll stay there. So anybody wants to look at the history of this property, they can see who all owned it in the past and exactly when did they own it, during what time period did they own it. That's the chain of title. But then there's also the abstract of title. Now, this one's important, not only for test purposes, but you need to understand what an abstract is. At the end of the day, this is what the attorney or whoever's doing the title search, this is what they have to prepare. Once they've completed their search, then they have to prepare this, what we call an abstract of title. This is a very condensed history that contains all grants that have ever taken place with this property, every conveyance that's ever taken place with the property, any judicial proceedings, anything that ever happened that could have affected title to that property will show up in the abstract. So when we're talking about grants, if anybody ever gave the property to somebody else, it'll show up in the abstract. If that property has ever been sold, it will show up in the abstract. If there was any legal proceedings, judicial proceedings, that will show up in the abstract. All this information, the lender's going to need it, especially the underwriter for the lender, because they're getting ready to loan all this money on this property. They want to make sure there's nothing in this abstract that would indicate there could be a problem with title, right? If they found a cloud on the title, typically the lender's not going to loan the money. You got to cure whatever that cloud is, get it removed, and then you could potentially get the loan at that point. But make sure you know what an abstract of title is. It's just a condensed history of all grants, conveyances, and judicial proceedings that affected title to that property. And then marketable title. We've talked about this a little bit already, quite a bit. But you got to have marketable title in order to convey the property. Marketable title means you own the property free of any title defects. There's no liens. There's no judicial proceedings that's going on. There's no issues with the property. Then that's considered marketable title. Now, what you'll hear a lot of times, even the closing attorney will say things like, the seller must be able to provide both good and marketable title. Well, that's two different things. That's two different types of title. But the seller does have to provide good and marketable title. Well, what's the difference? Well, first of all, good title just means you own it. That's proof of ownership. It means you own it, no one else owns it, and so forth. So obviously, if you can't prove you own it, then you can't prove good title, so you're not going to be able to sell it. But once we can prove you own it, you have good title, and then marketable title means you can actually convey it to someone else, meaning there are no liens, there are no defects, no encumbrances. There's nothing there to adversely affect title to the property. So once the title company or attorney, whoever's doing the closing, once they can show both good and marketable title, then you qualify for title insurance. You can get the loan, you can convey the property, and everybody's happy. Okay, so those are your different types of titles and what's going on with the title search.